Before getting under the car, prepare your pressure bleeder by filling it with your desired brake fluid and connecting it to the brake fluid reservoir. Do not pressurize the system yet. Underneath the car, remove the stock slave cylinder by unbolting it from the transmission. Pull it back and out, but be careful not to drop the rubber boot or push rod into the transmission. Before installing, you'll need to select the correct length rod. Your slave cylinder kit should have come with 3 push rod insert options. You will measure using the rod with the 2 lines on it. Place the cap on the end of it and carefully slide it into the transmission, seating it into the divot on the clutch fork, as it would normally sit with the slave cylinder installed. If both lines are clearly showing when viewed from directly below, you will use the shorter OEM length rod. If only one line is showing, you'll want to use this rod that you're measuring with. If none of the lines are showing, you'll want to use the longest one. Place the cap onto your selected rod and seat the boot into the groove in the cap. Place the other end of the rod into its seat in the piston and pull the boot over the sides. Now, back at the car, remove the old slave cylinder from the clutch line by opening the retaining clip with a pick or flathead screwdriver. Pull the old one off and quickly replace it with the new unit to minimize lost fluid. Before moving forward, check inside the original unit to see if the stock clutch line seal got left behind. If it did, it's important to remove this and reinstall it on the end of the clutch line, or the system will begin to leak immediately. This is only a concern with the stock clutch line and not an aftermarket braided clutch line. Secure it with the retaining clip. Next, you'll need to bleed the system. It's important to bleed it with the back of the slave cylinder higher than the front, which can be achieved by either leaving it hanging down outside of the transmission or installing it and jacking up the rear of the car. A pressure bleeder is the only reliable way to bleed these systems on a B8 and 8.5 Audi. Vacuum bleeding, pumping the clutch, and gravity bleeding have a track record of not consistently working and should be avoided. Set your pressure to 5 to 7 psi, but do not exceed 7 psi to prevent overpressurizing the system. Check for leaks at the slave cylinder. If there are no leaks, connect your catch bottle to the bleeder screw and set the line so it goes directly upwards from the bleeder. This is so fluid will completely fill the tube, so any air bubbles will be clearly visible. If tipped down, the fluid will simply flow along the bottom of the tube and no bubbles will form. Crack the bleeder and watch as bubbles of air make their way out of the system. Once the bubbles have clearly stopped, tighten the bleeder and install the new slave cylinder into the transmission. It is a tight fit. Pinch the rod through the boot to guide it so the end of the rod correctly seats into the divot of the clutch fork. And be sure that the boot and push rod don't fall into the transmission. If it proves to be too difficult for the slave cylinder to seat correctly and does not seem to budge, you may need to try using the next size down push rod. Once seated, tighten the bolt back down and test the clutch pedal. If it feels normal, release the pressure from the bleeder and close the reservoir. Your installation is now complete.